Friends, subscribe and don't miss the boldest stories from the world of organized crime. And if this video hits your gangster soul, smash that like button.
Я горжусь своей жизнью, прожитой жизнью, вне зависимости от того, что она у меня была очень трудная и непростая. Я нигде не дрогнул, я везде шел прямо, я нигде не сделал шага в сторону, налево и тем более назад. Я никогда никого не боялся. Я всегда иду прямо в жизни. Нет на земле ни одного человека, которому я не мог бы смотреть прямо в глаза.
In the shadow world of organized crime, certain names become legend. Names whispered in fear, spoken with respect. In the brutal hierarchy of the Russian underworld, one name rose above all others in the final decades of the 20th century. Vyacheslav Ivankov, known to both criminals and law enforcement by a single nickname that would become synonymous with calculated violence, Yaponchik. The little Japanese, but don't let the diminutive fool you. This was no small player. What made Yaponchik different from the countless thugs and enforcers who populated the Soviet criminal landscape? It wasn't his physical presence. It wasn't even his capacity for violence, though that was considerable. It was something far more dangerous, his mind. While others in the underworld operated on instinct and rage, Ivankov played chess. He was known for an almost supernatural calm, even in the most violent situations. Former associates describe a man who could order an execution with the same emotional detachment as ordering breakfast. This wasn't psychopathy, it was something more refined. It was strategy. But where did this cold calculation come from? To understand the man who would build a criminal empire spanning 2 continents, we must first understand the world that created him. The early years and the making of a mafia boss. Vyacheslav Ivankov was born in 1940 in Vladivostok, a port city on Russia's Pacific coast. His mother was Russian, his father Korean, a heritage that would give him his legendary nickname and, ironically, make him an outsider in a country that demanded conformity. The 1960s and 70s Soviet Union was a society of contradictions. Officially, crime didn't exist in the workers' paradise. Unofficially, a vast criminal network operated in the shadows, filling the gaps left by the failing Soviet economy. Ivankov's criminal education began early. By the 1970s, he was already circulating through the Soviet prison system, what inmates called the universities of crime. Here, in the brutal Gulag camps, a unique criminal culture had evolved over decades. At the apex of this criminal hierarchy stood the Vory v. Zakone, the thieves in law. These weren't mere criminals. They were a criminal aristocracy, bound by an ancient code that prohibited contact with Soviet authorities, forbade legitimate work, and demanded absolute loyalty to the criminal world. To become a Vor was to achieve criminal immortality. And Yaponchik wanted in. But here's what few know. Ivankov's path to becoming a thief in law wasn't straightforward. His mixed heritage initially worked against him in the xenophobic Soviet underworld. He compensated by becoming more ruthless, more disciplined, more strategically brilliant than anyone around him. In the late 1970s, Ivankov aligned himself with Evsei Agron, an influential criminal figure, and began building his network. He understood something that would define his career. In the chaos of the declining Soviet system, the real power wouldn't come from muscle alone. It would come from connections to other criminals, to corrupt officials, to anyone who could be bought or intimidated. By the early 1980s, Ivankov had earned his crown. He was formally recognized as a Vor v. Zakone, joining an elite club of fewer than 300 men who held this title. But even as he rose through the ranks in Russia, Ivankov was looking westward. The Cold War was thawing. Soviet Jews were being allowed to immigrate. And with them, an opportunity was opening, an opportunity to build an empire in the land of unlimited possibilities, America. Expansion into the U.S. New York, 1992. While the FBI was focused on the Italian mafia families, a new threat was quietly establishing itself in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. Soviet immigrants, escaping the collapsing USSR, brought with them more than just their families and hopes for a better life. They brought their criminals. And in 1992, the most dangerous of them all arrived. Vyacheslav Ivankov landed at JFK Airport on a tourist visa. The FBI wouldn't know he was in the country for another year. His mission? To unite the fractious Russian criminal groups already operating in America and to extract tribute, what Russians call obchak, for the thieves in law back home. Ivankov moved quickly. He established himself in the Rasputin nightclub on Coney Island Avenue, turning it into his headquarters. From here, he coordinated operations that spanned from Boston to Los Angeles. Extortion, money laundering, Medicare fraud, credit card schemes, and weapons, always weapons. But here's a fact that remained hidden for decades. Ivankov wasn't just running street-level operations. Intelligence sources later revealed his involvement in arms trafficking between the former Soviet states and the United States during the chaotic early 1990s. With the Soviet military in disarray, weapons were disappearing from armories across Russia. Many of those weapons found their way to American streets, and Ivankov was facilitating the pipeline. What made Ivankov truly dangerous was his management style. He didn't act like a traditional mob boss screaming, threatening, making scenes. He was quiet, methodical, almost businesslike. Former FBI agents describe him as more CO than gangster. He held court at the Rasputin, receiving visitors, dispensing justice, settling disputes. He wore expensive suits. He was polite, even charming. And underneath that calm exterior, he was absolutely merciless. One story, never fully verified but widely believed in the Russian community: a Brighton Beach businessman refused to pay Ivankov's tax. The businessman's son was kidnapped. The ransom? $1.5 million. When the FBI investigated, they found a sophisticated operation involving safe houses across 3 states. The businessman paid. His son came home. And the message was sent: you don't say no to Yaponchik. But Ivankov's genius wasn't just in violence. It was in his diplomatic skills. While the Russian criminals fought amongst themselves, he served as mediator, arbitrator, and when necessary, judge. He understood that a unified Russian mafia could be exponentially more powerful than fractured gangs. And he was building something unprecedented: a truly international criminal network that connected Brighton Beach to Moscow, Tel Aviv to Los Angeles. The battle with rival factions and the FBI. The FBI was watching. By 1994, they knew who Yaponchik was. They knew what he represented. And they knew they had to stop him. But catching Ivankov proved extraordinarily difficult. He was disciplined in his communications, paranoid about surveillance, and surrounded by a network of loyal enforcers who had learned their tradecraft in Soviet prisons. Meanwhile, Ivankov was navigating another dangerous game: relations with the established Italian-American crime families. The Russians were operating on mob territory, and that required careful negotiation. Here's what remained hidden for years: Ivankov was playing both sides. While publicly showing respect to the Italian families, he was simultaneously cutting deals with their rivals, expanding his territory, and even coordinating with other ethnic criminal organizations: Chinese, Colombian, anyone who could help build his empire. But intelligence sources later revealed something even more shocking. Ivankov maintained connections with Russian government officials and intelligence operatives. Some speculate these were relationships forged during his time in Soviet prisons, where KGB informants and political prisoners mingled with common criminals. Whatever the source, these connections provided Ivankov with protection that went far beyond the typical mob boss's political fix. He wasn't just a criminal, he was an asset, a connection point between the old Soviet intelligence networks and the new Russian oligarchy emerging in Moscow. Finally, in June 1995, the FBI made their move. Ivankov was arrested in connection with the extortion case that had been building against him. The charges: racketeering, conspiracy, and extortion. But even in custody, Yaponchik remained calm. He knew something the FBI didn't. He wasn't afraid of American prison. He'd survived the gulags. And more importantly, he knew that back in Russia, his legend was only growing. In 1999, after serving nearly 4 years in federal prison, Ivankov was deported to Russia. The Americans thought they were rid of him. They were wrong. His return to Russia and reign. Moscow, 1999. The Russia that Ivankov returned to was unrecognizable from the Soviet Union he'd left. The USSR had collapsed. Oligarchs had seized state assets. And organized crime had penetrated every level of society. It was chaos. It was opportunity. And Yaponchik was home. Here's the remarkable fact. Despite his criminal record, despite his international reputation, Ivankov never served significant prison time in Russia. He was arrested in 2005 on murder charges, but the case collapsed. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. His connections, forged over decades, proved bulletproof. Ivankov maintained his status as a Vor v Zakone, one of the highest-ranking members of the Russian criminal hierarchy. He moved freely through Moscow, dining at expensive restaurants, attending cultural events, living in luxury. But he wasn't retired. Intelligence reports suggest he was coordinating operations across Europe and Asia, facilitating money laundering for the new generation of Russian criminals, and serving as a connector between the criminal world and corrupt officials at the highest levels of Russian government. Associates describe Ivankov in his final years as an elder statesman of crime, respected, feared, consulted on major decisions. He had achieved something rare in the criminal world. He had survived. More than survived, he had prospered. But in the violent world Ivankov inhabited, survival is never guaranteed. On July 28, 2009, Vyacheslav Ivankov left a restaurant in central Moscow. As he stepped onto the street, a sniper's bullet, fired from a nearby building, struck him in the stomach. He survived the initial shooting, but died 2 months later from complications. He was 69 years old. The investigation into his murder remains officially unsolved. The legacy. The Yaponchik myth. Today, more than a decade after his death, the name Yaponchik still carries weight in the Russian criminal world. His methods, the combination of ruthless violence with strategic thinking, the maintenance of political connections, the building of international networks became the template for modern Russian organized crime. The criminal organizations he helped establish continue to operate across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. His protégés rose to become major figures in their own right. And his techniques for money laundering and international coordination are still studied by both criminals and law enforcement. In Brighton Beach, older residents still speak of Yaponchik in hushed tones, some with fear, others with a grudging respect. He represented something specific in the Russian immigrant experience, the idea that in America, you could build an empire, even a criminal one, through intelligence and ruthlessness. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Vyacheslav Ivankov is this. He proved that in the post-Cold War world, organized crime would be international, sophisticated, and deeply connected to political power. The Little Japanese? A nickname that belied his enormous influence. A man who built an empire in the shadows, who connected continents through crime, who survived the gulags and American federal prison, only to fall to an assassin's bullet in the city where his legend was born. Who ordered his killing? What secrets did he take to his grave? These questions remain unanswered, adding to the mythology of a man who, even in death, refuses to be fully understood. Vyacheslav Yaponchik Ivankov, architect of modern Russian organized crime, and proof that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a brilliant, calculating mind that refuses to play by anyone's rules but its own.